Okay, now let's create a new project. Okay, for exception handling, where we do all hands-on examples in this project. Okay, now the moment you create a project, you could see there's nothing in this canvas. Now, as we discussed in the previous session, right, what is the first component that we need to create? Here, it's a listener who will takes our request. Let's see. Now here we have to create one listener interface. Well, how do you create that? Just clicking on the mark, then it will come with the default protocol HTTP, and host is default local host is also use 0.0.0.0, and default port is 8081. You can change to any port as required. Just see test connection. Okay, as told you, right, this Mule instance is not running. So what is the troubleshoot step? Go to Windows, Preferences, checks, Tooling, go here and check this is not running. Now restarting Studio Services. You see, Studio Services are running, then close. If these Studio Services are running, then we cannot implement our flows. Okay, this still running, it takes time. Until then, okay, we go ahead with this until it come. The moment it complete that, it will start the services running. Okay, until then, we go ahead. Okay, now path we say exception. That's all. Okay, now our listener is ready with the required details. Now, what is the next step? We can do as a part of exception handling, just we do some payload or we do some logger, no matter what is this. This is the next point. Then we are trying to see the exception handling. That what is that exception handling? Say, let's take. You can take an example of any number. Okay, the what number you give one number, that is that number is valid or not. So first send the payload from the from the postman or anywhere, no matter but where you are taking the input. Let's take set payload, because we already have a payload component that is used to set the payload. Now what we do here, we give some string hello. Okay, this is not actually number, right? So what I'm trying to do, we have a some validator. What is called that is number field. So the example is okay. There is a validation field called is number. This guy, what do he checks the incoming data, incoming input is a number or not. So it just validate what value he will validate. Say payload. He will take the payload. This is the payload, right? So you see this after set the moment to set this, what is this value is a payload value, right? So this payload will send to this guy. It is directly showing the payload. In other cases we see, right, in the previous sessions we see the payload is stored in the variable called payload. Now this guy is already a payload guy, so it directly take the data from the payload. Okay, see, now this guy will check the incoming data is number or not. So what it is asking that number type, what I can check here is number is a integer, float, double or not. How do I validate this number? You check it should be a integer. Okay, then we have to instruct this guy. This incoming input should be a number. If it is number, you can go to the next processor, and otherwise you go with the exception handling, how this developer is returned. Okay, now set the same payload, right? Next success, we do what we call it as a success, which means say if it is a number is integer, then this guy come here or where it will fall. Okay, let's see that if it is success, then this guy will be come out and display success. Now what is the first step? As we discussed in the previously, let's say start with the error continue. So you just type, if you don't know the spelling, right, just say error. Then you could see all the error scope that are available, that are provided by the Mule. And now use error continue. So as we discussed, if on error continue is there, what will happen? It no matter where whether you are using error propagate or error continue, when they just stop executing the next event processor in this flow and come out with the status code. What is the status code? 200, and message
200.
is the error message what you have said in this. It is just a box, right? It is a content, it does not have anything. So if you don't set anything, what error message I can display? You just say that. So to display something, you have to tell something, right? What error message this guy wants to return, right? For
200.
that you use a payload again. Means payload is nothing but to set some data. Let's see
Data.
this. 1 second, it's running. Okay, so here you said, what is this? Error
Error.
in main flow. This is the main flow, right? This is the parent flow. So this we call it as a main flow. For example, if something goes wrong here, this it comes here and says that, hey guy, error in the main flow. So this guy, what he do, his job is on error continue, where this guy is sitting in the main flow. So according to the rule, on error continue, what it does, if it is the same flow within the flow, it does not have any subflow, then this guy stop processing the next flow, means processing the rest of the flow. Wherever the error happen, for as in our case, error might happen here. So this guy said, please don't continue the rest of the flow. Come out with the error message and display that to the end user. Let's see now. I will debug and show you that. Put a breakpoint at the beginning flow and start the application in debug mode. It is not always to see in the debug mode for you, right? During hands-on, if something you are not able to find out the cause, then it is debug always help you to diagnose your issues. Why I said debug here is to show you that how the flow is going. When something happens somewhere, where it is going, right? Then how it is coming back to the listener to give that error response. Let's wait for 1 minute. Let the application come up. Until then, before start the Postman tool. Okay, see, as we see this in our example flow, what's going to happen when the request come to this listener? This guy is setting the payload, means setting some string integer instead of integer. But this guy is validating the input data, which is done in the set payload. But what is his role? His role is taking the payload and validate the number type is integer. Then if this rule fail, right, I am validating the number, checking that input value is a string. If it is not string, then I cannot process the next thing to do, right? What is maybe in the next processor, next flow is always depend on this valid information. If this data is not valid, how do I proceed to the next flow? Then I will throw the exception. Someone tell me, right? Someone take care of that, whether you can continue your flow or if you want to terminate your flow. It doesn't matter for me. And my job is to validate the data and hand over to someone. Who is that someone? The exception handling guy. They will decide how to execute the flow. Okay, let's say it's still not coming up. Okay, until then we build this path. As we see in this, what is this path? As we said, localhost 8888 and path is exception or exceptions. Let's go back. Exception, right? Okay, just exception. Okay. Now application is deployed. It is already exception. Now you see you know, change the method post, and we are not posting anything. See, it is keep going on, not coming out, which means that we have set the debug mode. We started the application in the debug mode. Once this start debugging, go to Mule debugger and see this next processor. Next processor, it come here. See, next processor is doing this one, right? So number type, it is expecting the number type, and the payload value you are sending, the value is hello. Hello is not valid number. See what it do? This guy go next processor, say hello is not a valid integer value. Then what it do? See this guy go here, because this guy is handling the exception, right? I told you, right? Someone is handling the exception. You are not, your validation is failed. Your fail means input is not a valid input. So this guy throw the exception because it is a bad input. Just throw it away. When this guy throw that, this guy is the one who handle the exception. What scope is that? Then it will decide later. When the moment it comes here, what is the description? Hello is not a valid value. What is? See, it is created a error object. You see both. See, it is created an error object with the description. Hello is not a valid, and detailed description is this one. And see this. What type of error is this? Validation error. What validation? Invalid number. So like that, the error object will be created by the Mule, and it provides with this much information. So we don't need this information. We display to the end user what is necessary. Means how end user will understand, or that much we can display. So if you display this much, that end user will can understand. If you display entire thing, then he has to read the entire message, and right, it is not required, right? Displaying this simple generic message can be easily readable and easily understandable. Okay, now see, this object is error object having this much of information. Okay, now this guy is coming here. According to our rules, what will happen when on error continue? If it is within this flow, it will not continue the rest of the flow. If this guy go back to listener and show the message, right? Error message with the 200. See, now it is not coming here. See one, but what is the output? Error in main flow. Why error in main flow, right? I set the payload as error in main flow. This is the message I am setting here. Suppose you don't want to set this one, right? We have Mule is providing already error dot, right, description, right? No, you want to use that description, error description, which Mule is providing. That I want to display, because your message something, right? It is saying error in main flow. Mean what error in main flow? How do I understand? The end user cannot understand, right? So Mule is already providing with you the detailed information about what is that error. So sometimes it is not always case that Mule is providing that such information, right? You can have custom messages also here, right? There is something went wrong, because you know that it might be some external connector or etc. Maybe calling different flows, or no matter what it is, but you want to give the more meaningful message to the user. That case, you can give your custom message, right? Just say error in main flow, error in subflow. User cannot understand what error happened. User has to understand, right? That's why you have to give the proper message so that end user can understand that clearly. Now skip this breakpoint. Now see, hello is not a valid integer value, right? So whatever you set in this, that will be displayed as a output payload. What is this output? It is a payload only, right? Why it is saying output dot payload? You see here in this, because right in this is a 200, right? For always 200, what you are returning in this listener? You see this listener responses, this is a 200 response, right? This first section of the response is related to 200, am right? If it is 500, this error dot description will come. Let's see that one also. Now the same flow we change to different scope. Instead of on error continue, what I do, we will change. Okay, let's put it outside. Okay, later we'll drag that here. Now instead of on error propagate, we will, sorry, on error continue, we will use error propagate. Now drag this guy and put this guy here again. Here I'm setting same thing, error dot description. But you go to the listener and see This time, what is the error response? They have given default. Okay, it is saying error dot description. Now let's see here, instead of error description, I will say error occurred. Okay, error occurred. Okay, this is error occurred. Now start in the debug mode only. So this case, what will happen? This guy again, same thing. When the request comes to listener, then it will send the request to next component, set payload, which will already set the payload as an integer. But this guy expecting that input should be a number. Again, it failed. When this failed, this guy come here. Hey guy, something went wrong here. Okay, this throw the exception. This guy is handling the exception. What scope it is error propagate. Propagate in the sense what? Throwing the exception. Means it just throw the exception on the face, right? And I cannot handle this exception, right? Even error continue or error propagate, if it is if we have only one flow, behaviorism, it will not let you, it will not allow you to continue the rest of the flows. Means it will not let you to continue the rest of the flows. Both will go back to the listener only. But the difference is on error propagate will return back to listener with error response, means 500. On error propagate is 500 and error continue go back to listener with the 200 status code. Let's see now the difference. Now I'm giving the same request. Now it comes here. You see the debug mode. Go here through the exception. Okay. See here low is not a valid integer. So what it go again? This guy has to come here. This guy has come here. This guy decided. This guy is a propagate guy. I mean, this guy will not handle. This guy is a what it does. Okay. Why go back to the listener? What it is saying? Hello is not a valid integer. You can ask me, surprise here, why hello is not a valid integer? But I have not given a valid integer here. What is the message you give here? Error occurred. But why it is not displaying error occurred? Anyone can tell? Error occurred will not displayed. Why? Because see, I told you, right? The on error propagate response code is 500, which is the error message. It is not a success message. In the listener, we have clear error message, response sections. One is success. This is used for status 200 and this is used for status 500. All the error messages, right? I told you, right? Error dot description, that is what Mule is providing the default description. That is what you could say hello is not a valid integer value. That's why it is displaying this one. If it is a success message, whatever the payload we set, this is the payload object, right? Payload component. Here you have set error record, right? Yeah, on error continue case, you could see this message. If it is on error propagate, then you could see this one, which the Mule is providing this message. Okay. Now let's see the status code. We have not seen that what it is when the exception happen. Okay, this guy come here and it create error type. Okay. See how this is create a complete stack trace for all this error, right? So irrespective of this, no matter what error it is, then Mule comes with the default error messages, default error types, right? It provides you all the details for this. And see all this, you could see this one attributes. I told it previously. I have to tell this. These attributes are nothing but, right, all our query params, right? Raw param request or relative param, right? Everything will be as a part of request attributes, even headers, right? All this part of request params attributes. And from the attribute, we are capturing the data from the query param, or it is a URI param, and so on. So on. See, URI param is here, and this is a query params string and query param. Right? Okay, coming to this actual part. See, it is caused by exception is caused by hello is not a valid integer. So that is the reason we could see this. So what is the description? We see error dot description. See, this is what error dot description we are seeing. So this is detailed description, right? For some valid numbers, right, this description and detailed description will be different. Sometimes it will be same because there is nothing to give detail, right? It's not a valid integer value. If you want to give detailed description, what it doesn't make sense, right? This can be understood by the end user, right? So this is how this error propagate and error continue will behave. Hope both are clear about that on error continue and error propagate, right? Now let's take an example of I don't handle an error here. Let's remove this completely. Now, as we discussed, right, the third thing is that Mule default error handling, right? Let's debug again. So I told you, right, if someone in the flow, if there is something wrong in the flow, if something wrong in the event processor, right, then it checks someone is handled exception here, error handling. Otherwise, there is a global exception handling. I told you, right, using error handler, we have to do that exception handling. So it will check, is this guy also, this guy is there for me to handle exception? No, if no one is there, what this guy do? This guy will ask Mule to provide the Mule default exception handling. Then the Mule default exception will come out and start behaving as a error propagate, because this guy will not let you give the success message always. The job is Mule default exception handling is always propagate the error with 500 status code. So that case, what you could see the error response here. What are the response we see, right? Hello is not a valid integer. Why? Because this guy will accept default exception is handler is always propagating the errors with 500. That is the reason this error message will come where from the response body of error response body. It is already saying error dot description. Here you can give customize also, but you cannot give directly here error dot description. Something somewhere, right? Now if you use error propagate here, then you can set transformer, right, or a payload. Then you set some payload, all right, some value there. Then you can use that payload here so that it will give the detailed description. Okay, that we will see one by one. No worry. Let's see if the application is up. Okay, live application is deployed. Just send a request. Say the debug mode is started again here. Debug one by one. See, now the error is happened. See, we could see this one. Mule is already created error object for you with the details that it is going to provide us. See, it is not going anywhere because no one is handled here, because it's already checked, no one is handling that. Then Mule automatically take care of to propagate. You could see the same messages come here. Understood? Now,
Yes, sir.
yeah, see, as I told you, right, if we want some custom message, right, then we can use on error propagate, on error continue, no matter. Right? Let's take error propagate only. Okay, now we use set payload. Now here in this set payload, I said that fail to parse the input value. Okay, input value is failed. What is this payload, right? You understood? This is the payload component we are directly using. Now I go here in the response, I change that it should not take from the error object. I am expecting to display his payload, because payload has to come, because whatever the message I set in the payload has to come and display as a part of my my message. So this time what happened, this guy throw the exception, it comes here, then whatever the message here, right, what is a payload, right? But even if you set the payload on error continue, right, what happened, then it is taking the success response. If it is propagate, right, it is displaying the default message. What is the default message? Mule default error message. But this case, this guy will not give the default Mule message, right, default error message. This guy is saying payload, because we have overridden with our custom message. because it is not always the case that we display that Mule provided default error message. So it's always best thing that if you give your message, generic message, custom message, so which is a meaningful message. If you have already Mule messages that is already providing with the detailed description, that is enough, then you can say error dot description. But still error dot description it gives, then we are adding some meaningful information along with the default error message, right, to get it more detailed. Let's see. Okay, application is deployed. Just send the request. See, failed to parse the input. Even though it is a 500 response here, right? Earlier scenario, what we see, if it is a 500 response code, what we could see here, it is saying error dot description. But this case, I have overridden with the my custom message, right? That is the reason you could see fail to parse the input value. So this is how you can customize. You can give your own messages here and you can override the default error messages. So this is what the single flow that, right? So tomorrow, okay, let's see now. Oh, so hope everyone is clear about this, how this error propagate and error continue behaves, how you override with the Mule provided default error messages, how you display this. Okay.